A host of issues were discussed. On India at G20 today, we ask, is India's G20 chair building consensus on issues like attracting finance for cities of tomorrow in view of the fact that global investment gap of $0.7 trillion a year was projected by the Global Infrastructure Hub in 2017 and now it is $3 trillion a year, with potential to grow even higher as the world grapples with economic turmoil, geopolitical tensions and climate change. We will also analyze takeaways on urban planning and capacity building of urban administration on the show today and give you a sneak peek into what to expect over the next 3 days during the Health Working Group meeting in Thiruvananthapuram. I'm Manu Bhattacharya. First up, the top stories. First G20 Infrastructure Working Group meeting concludes in Pune. Delegates deliberate on inclusivity in urban service delivery, capacity building of urban administration for cities of tomorrow, and finalizing future of global infrastructure hub on the second and final day of the meeting. On the eve of the first Health Working Group meeting in Thiruvananthapuram, Union Health Minister Dr. Mansukh Mandavia pens an article on the health agenda before India's G20 president writes, India's G20 presidency provides an opportunity for creating a fairer global health architecture. Health Ministry in a press interaction highlights India's focus on developing a resilient, responsive and robust global health architecture. IDSA hosts the 14th South Asia Conference on Think 20 at G20 towards a resilient South Asia in New Delhi. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant says India has taken over G20 presidency on behalf of the Global South, calls for a completely different financial architecture in view of debt burden facing developing countries. Think 20 India Chair Ambassador Sujon Chinoy says as G20 President, India attaches great importance to neighbourhood policy, life, multilateralism and SDGs. The first G20 Infrastructure Working Group meeting concluded in Pune. The second and final day saw deliberations on inclusivity in urban service delivery, capacity building of urban administration for cities of tomorrow and finalizing future of global infrastructure hub. The next meeting is slated to take place in March. Here are the highlights of the two-day meeting in Pune.
Day 1 of G20 Infrastructure Working Group meeting saw the first session being opened by Union Minister for Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises Narayan Rane, who flagged the possibility of population explosion in the years to come and called for global cooperation to make cities future ready to meet the growing demands. That was followed by a presentation by Finance Ministry officials on the infrastructure priorities of India's G20 presidency in 2023. The day also saw a detailed discussion on the working group's flagship theme, Building Cities of Tomorrow, Sustainable, Inclusive and Resilient, where Government of India proposed a work plan which was received well by G20 delegates who also gave their inputs.
In the afternoon, we went to Pune University where the workshop was organized by the Asian Development Bank. The workshop was focused on attracting private finance for infrastructure development in urban cities. The idea of having that workshop is to get inputs into the main theme that we are working on. So they deliberated on various financing models that are successful across the globe. They gave successful examples from different countries like US, about Mexico's successful municipal bond program. So that was very helpful.
The workshop also deliberated on capacity building of urban and municipal government employees and other stakeholders in the ecosystem, especially for attracting private sector finance. Day 1 ended with cultural performances on the theme of Shiv Rajabhishek, including Lavani, Kar Pallavi, Potraj and Mardani Khel. These performances enthralled the G20 delegates in Pune.
That was followed up by a cultural program there for about 30 minutes. It was a medley comprising of Shiv Vantana, all the traditional Maratha historical folklore, and then it's a mix of everything. That was very highly appreciated by the delegates, and many of you might have already seen in the social media that they went up to the extent of joining the dances there. So it was a very high engagement was there for that.
Day 2 saw deliberations on Infra Tracker, which tracks how countries allocate infrastructure stimulus across sectors and outcomes. India proposed improvements in this regard. Capacity building was also discussed in view of Asian development banks developing a framework for giving training and rolling out capacity building measures for the urban administration. Discussions also took on Global Infrastructure Hub, a not-for-profit organization formed by G20 that advances the delivery of sustainable, resilient and inclusive infrastructure. Large number of delegates participated in the sessions.
Sessions here. So the first session was on the Infra Tracker. So as all of you know, that's a legacy work which is happening across various presidencies. This year we have proposed some improvements on that. So there was a discussion on that. And then there was another major thing that is discussed on the capacity building itself, where Asian Development Bank is developing a framework for giving training and various capacity building measures for the urban administration. There was large participation, in fact. It was an engaging two-day event, and we hope that the next meeting, which is scheduled in March, all these inputs will be processed, and we will be delivering actually the draft versions of whatever we intend to do.
During India's G20 presidency, the G20 Infrastructure Working Group will continue to be the forum where discussions will continue to be held in future also on making cities sustainable, resilient and inclusive, on their financing needs and on attracting more funding to support infrastructure building. With inputs from Shyama Mishra and Meghna Dev in Pune, Bureau Report, DD India.
The Day 1 sessions of G20 Infrastructure Working Group meeting concluded with delegates experiencing Maharashtra's cultural programs. These included traditional dances like Shiv Vandana, Vardani Khel, Vaghya Murali, Gondal, Lavani, Karpalavi, among others. Karpalavi is a special act which showcases the community having special talent to play rhythm on musical instruments, through which they deliver messages secretly to their teammates. The performers displayed the martial art of great Maratha Empire. The delegates were mesmerized by the cultural performances, and many tried their hands on
see a high, strength performance of all these traditional dancers who perform the traditional folk dances of Maharashtra. Tell us a little history about all the dances and why were only these selected to showcase it to the foreign delegates?
Okay, in Pune, basically it was a theme for the saga of the Maratha Empire, and basically we were working for not only the martial art of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, but all the factors. Means we use the Karpallavi, also the sign language which created. Then all the in present language, all the detectives who work for the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj to build his empire. So we use the folklores as well, the Gondal, Zagar, Lavani. In Lavani we use the Chakkar. Then we use the Puneri Dhol at the last to entertain with all the delegates and show all the Maratha means all our folk instruments.
Showcasing your culture, our tradition to the foreign delegates. How does it feel?
It feels beautiful and it feels honored to perform at G20 and represent Maharashtra. We performed here various dances, and one of the performances we had done over here is one of the folk art of Maharashtra, that is Gondhar.
It's an honor, it's a privilege to represent Maharashtra and Maharashtrian folk dances with such a wonderful team on the stage.
Of course, very, very proud to showcase our culture. Like, it feels beautiful to interact with them. They get to know our culture and they enjoy it. That is most important.
These are all the dancers decked up in their traditional avatar, and we can also see Lejim. Lejim was also performed, and Lejim along with the Dhol, Tasha, all the delegates, foreign delegates, in the end started coming and dancing all together with these dancers. With camera person Rohan Gauli, this is Shama Mishra for DD India, Pune, Maharashtra.
Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis is hosting a two-day 14 South Asia conference on Think 20 at G20 towards a resilient South Asia in New Delhi. Delivering the inaugural address, India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant said India has taken over the G20 presidency on behalf of the Global South and has called for a completely different financial architecture in view of the debt burden facing 75 developing countries. Think 20 India Chair Ambassador Sujan Chinoy said that G20 as a mass movement has ignited the minds of millions of Indians, and India attaches great importance to the neighbourhood policy, life, multilateralism and attaining the sustainable development goals. Right. Let's move on now. The first Health Working Group meeting under India's G20 presidency will be held in Thiruvananthapuram from 18th to 20th January. The health track of G20 India presidency will comprise 4 Health Working Group meetings and 1 Health Ministerial meeting. The meeting will deliberate on digital health and medical value travel, among other issues. Here's a primer for you on the eve of the first Health Working Group meeting in Thiruvananthapuram.
Delegates from G20 countries reached Thiruvananthapuram, the capital of the southern Indian state of Kerala. Upon arrival, they received a traditional welcome at the airport. God's own country is all set to showcase its cultural vibrancy to G20 delegates. India, during its presidency, will focus on 3 main priorities under the health track: health emergencies, preparedness and response, strengthening cooperation in the pharmaceutical sector, and digital health innovation and solutions.
From a health track perspective, what is very critical to highlight is basically this, because of the COVID pandemic, and since because of the COVID pandemic, it has been brought to fore that health becomes the converging point for all growth and even the economic stability across the world. So this has become one of the most important working group within the G20, and we would be focusing for a resilient, responsive and inclusive global health architecture. The point to submit here is specifically to highlight that with COVID-19 pandemic, there is a bigger discussion going on across the world. What should be a fit-for-purpose global health architecture for the future?
Kerala will also host a side event with each health working group meeting to enrich, supplement and support G20 discussions. These events include medical value travel and digital health, a workshop on collaborative research on drugs, diagnostics and vaccines, and a co-branded event on the Global Center for Traditional Medicine. Kerala is the land of Ayurveda and Yoga with vast indigenous healthcare.
Can this priority be used to create that framework where regional level R&D networks for medical countermeasures can take place. So when we talk about medical countermeasures, are three elements specifically: vaccines, therapeutics or drugs, and diagnostics. So from a medical management perspective, all the three elements of medical countermeasures are equally important. And for all these medical countermeasures, how do we create network of R&Ds across the world so that it is widely available across the world to countries at large?
The Bali G20 declaration has also initiated a discussion on pandemic fund, and this meet will focus on further strengthening it. A key highlight will be strengthening the pharmaceutical sector. India's Vaccine Maitri initiative will be a taking point to take further the mutual agenda of further the pharmaceutical requirements of the world.
2019 in the Japanese presidency, we talked about the convergence or the need of effective convergence of health and finance track so as to ensure that sufficient funds are made available and convergence take place and health is given the required priority. With respect to multiple activities which are happening within G20, health has taken its prime place or the primacy because of the fact that world at large has understood that without a sustainable health framework, it would definitely be impossible for even to have the required economic stability.
Under India's prestigious G20 presidency, the first health working group meeting happening here at this beautiful, scenic and blissful God's own country backdrop sets the ball rolling. The agenda will be to meet emergencies and be prepared to handle these emergencies. But besides this, India will also showcasing its rich heritage and culture and the indigenous treasure that Kerala holds in Ayurveda and yoga. This meeting will also underline the importance of digital health and India acting as a leader standing in solidarity with several countries when it comes to taking emergency health care for all. With cameraman Saurabh, Asha Khanam, DD India, Thiruvananthapuram.
On the eve of the first Health Working Group meeting in Thiruvananthapuram, Union Health Minister Dr. Mansukh Mandavia has penned an article on the health agenda before India as G20 President. He writes, as part of India's G20 presidency, policymakers from member countries and experts from the medical fraternity shall unfold the foundation and framework of a global health architecture at a series of Health Working Group meetings starting this month. GHA envisages equipping countries to face the next health emergency with robust healthcare systems. He further writes, for low and middle income countries, the situation in such times worsens as access to basic health is restricted and uneven. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has defined the central objective of India's G20 presidency as healing, harmony and hope. He envisages a more human-centric globalization where universal health care is a key priority. Let's go back to the lead story that we've been following. The two-day infrastructure working group meeting has concluded in Pune. To talk about that, we have with us Solomon Arokiaraj. He is Joint Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. So, Mr. Solomon, pleasure to have you from Pune joining us. We've heard you speak on the key takeaways of the two-day infrastructure working group meeting in the press briefing. But how would you summarize the key outcomes over 2 days?
It was very productive. We were able to put the main theme of India's infrastructure working group, that is building cities of tomorrow that are sustainable, resilient and inclusive. There was unanimous agreement on the proposal. So that will be the key deliverable for the India's infrastructure working group. Apart from this, on the sidelines, we had a very productive workshop organized by ADB, that is attracting private finance for the urban infrastructure. In addition to this, all the sessions went off very well and we had a very productive session.
Mr. Solomon, what are the constraints that you see as somebody who's headed the meeting over 2 days as far as infrastructure planning and financing is concerned? Because I understand that there is a significant financing gap that the world faces currently for urban transformation, and that is expected to only rise in future.
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. So currently the urban population is over 50%, and in about next 10-15 years it is supposed to rise by 1.5 times to 6 billion. So that puts a lot of requirement on the infrastructure. Currently, the infrastructure is funded by the government support across the world most of the times. There is need for private sector participation to rise, and also we have to use creative instruments of financing like the land value capture, transit-oriented development, the transfer of developmental rights. So all these things were discussed during this session, and the principle that we will be bringing out has a section on the financing which will cover all these aspects. So we are working on that.
Right. And I heard you say that the financing model of United States as well as Mexico was discussed. What are the best practices that various countries of G20, including India, are looking at in terms of exchanging? India is going to start its municipal bond program soon. Mexico has its municipal bond program as well. So what are the best practices that India may have identified as G20 president in the G20 member states and maybe in other countries as well?
India already has its municipal bond program. Many of our municipalities have already raised bonds.
Right.
But then the scale at which we are looking is what is important. So the credit enhancement program that we are working on to facilitate this municipalities to access bond market in a large number is what we are looking at. So the Mexico case study focused on the trust model that they worked out. So in fact, the Mexican government used to give guarantee for the municipalities to raise bond, which was a kind of incentive as well as a disincentive. So in order to avoid this disincentive, they worked out a trust model, which was discussed as a case study during this workshop, which was very interesting. So that's what we are working.
And in terms of innovative financing programs, you told us about various concepts that were discussed. Which is the favorite among them, or can we expect a potpourri going forward in what India is likely to propose going forward?
The land value capture model was discussed at length at the workshop. There were many successful case studies were also discussed. So that's a very interesting model. Across India also several examples are there on that. So that is one interesting input that will feed into the report.
Ahead of the infrastructure working group meeting in Pune, there were several Jan Bhagidari or public outreach initiatives wherein the government officials reached out to the people to know their views and suggestions on urban transformation. You spoke about how urban planning has to keep people at the center, or at the core of urban planning there should be people. So how is that being proposed as a concept by India in terms of implementation? What can we expect?
Yeah, in the run-up to G20, the whole event was organized in Pune. So first, a large number of people participated in an awareness program by a cyclothon, and then we had a lot of lecture series in the universities. There was a national workshop on the urban infrastructure, wherein Pune International Center, many think tanks in the Pune participated in large number of people attended that. So these are all events wherein people become part of the planning process and what the city needs. So basically, when the planning process centers around the needs of people, that's when the success of the program is. So that's what we focused on, and we were able to get a lot of support from the Pune citizens on that.
And how does India plan to take capacity building of urban administration forward by joining hands with various G20 countries?
Yeah, the capacity needs for all the cities, like be in the developed economies or in the developing economies. There is a framework that we have worked on, and we are trying to sharpen that because the ADB is going to be the lead partner in that deliverable. So we discussed various aspects of that, and we will sharpen the focus on the municipal financing part.
Right. And Mr. Solomon, you've told us that the next meeting of the infrastructure working group will be in March. So what is it that we can expect in terms of progress between now and then?
Yeah, the next meeting is in March, and the various deliverables, we have clear-cut timelines for the next 3 meetings. So many of the deliverables would have reached the draft stage, the draft report stage that will be presented in the next meeting for all the members to give their suggestions and opinions. Thereafter, in the 3rd and 4th meeting, many of the reports will be finalized and delivered.
Right, Mr. Solomon, thank you so much for discussing with us the outcomes of the 2-day infrastructure working group meeting. The next meeting takes place in March this year, like you told us.
Thank you.
So let's move on now as Thiruvananthapuram readies to host the first health working group meeting starting tomorrow. We leave you with what Kerala, the God's own country, has in store for G20 delegates. Take a look. Namaskar.
Kerala encapsulates the emotion of India with its vibrancy and diversity, bringing alive the spirit of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future.
Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Both as an educationist and as a parliamentarian, which are the schemes of the Modi government that you think have actually impacted the youth and the poorest of poor?
There's so many startups, unicorns coming up, so many activities going on.